and they found out that if you came from a genetic stock of people that were prone to obesity or prone to making food choices that were more snacky, junky kinds of foods, if you were adopted into a home that gave you healthy foods, as a child up until teenage years, you ate what mom and dad made you, healthy food, the whole thing. Then as soon as teenage years hit, you were able to make your own food choices, you veer so far into the average predictive of what your parents used to like that the degree of influence of your parents' adoptive parents' healthy eating instructions are almost undetectable.
So like when he says almost undetectable here, I would expect, I think, to see a chart that shows something like this, right? That's a huge claim, right? And it might be, and maybe I'm misunderstanding the stats or whatever, but like, so it sounds like if I'm looking at like the, let's say I'm looking at the heritability of BMI, okay? So how much of a change in BMI is explained by your genes or something, right? It sounds like, or genetic variants. It sounds like what he's saying is that if we were to graph this up to 1, so it's basically completely explained by your genes, to down here, it's not explained at all, and we look at the twin studies, it sounds like what he's saying is that if we say that this is when you're 18, and then this is like 18 plus, it sounds like what he's saying is like, well, if you put an adopted twin into a family, if their parents were fat, you know, there's not really, like, the kid eats healthy, the kid eats well, the kid does, you know, he's okay, he's eating what the parents tell him, but then as soon as he's out on his own, whoop, it's like coming up to here, right? Is there a chart like this, or is there a study that shows this? Like, it wouldn't surprise me if it looked a little bit like, this or something, or a little bit like this or something, sure. But he's saying almost is undetectable. Like, is this really happening? This is what I want to see. I want to see this chart or this study that he's referring to here.
In adoptive parents' healthy eating instructions are almost undetectable. Insanely rigorous research keeps coming up.
Like insanely rigorous research, like where? Like what? Like just
over and over again. Any parents who have had children listening to this show, if you've had one child, you can attest to the fact of how great of a parent you were and how your effects made them who they were. As soon as you have child number 2, you realize, holy shit, we're shooting in the dark. Kids kind of become sort of whatever the hell they were supposed to become, and we have barely any effect. And anyone who thinks they have a large degree of effect on a teenager is, I don't know, insert joke here, is large degree of delusion. The conventional wisdom on how education works and how upbringing works cannot possibly survive the rigorous data that shows that, for example, as I stated just now, food choice proclivity has almost nothing to do with a common home environment.
After age 12.
Correct. People
like that's I feel like that would be a really big study to have on hand. Like that would be a thing that you would like know, like a researcher or a journal or a date or something.
What about before it?
Before it has a ton to do because you don't make the choices that you have. Like they put stuff on your plate and you eat it.
And don't you believe that if you're set up before the age of 12 with bad habits that potentially created childhood obesity, that you're going to have worse outcomes as you get older?
Yeah, for sure.
So then how are you saying that those social worse outcomes?
And you eat it.
And don't you believe that if you're set up before the age of 12 with bad habits that potentially created childhood obesity, that you're going to have worse outcomes as you get older?
Yeah, for sure.
No, the answer has to be no, unless I'm misunderstanding something, because it sounds like you're saying that, because he said almost undetectable, your environment growing up. It sounds like it doesn't matter if you're fat or not before age 12. It just depends on what your parents feed you. You'll always return to whatever your genetic BMI mean is. That's what he said earlier. So I don't know how he reconciles both these answers here, but.
So then how are you saying that those social impacts are not equally as causative as the trait?
Because when you look at the behavioral genetic data, the social outcomes at the extremes can absolutely have an effect. But most of what you think are the social outcomes is literally just the expression of people's genetic proclivities over and over.
Yeah, but that wasn't hypothetical, right?
Mom and dad had the same ones. You have the same ones. And if you try to get kids.
What is this? Evidence for a strong genetic influence on childhood adiposity. Adiposity? I don't know. Despite the force of the obesogenic environment. Adipose is just how smart people say fat fucks. So this is saying there's a strong genetic influence on childhood obesity, despite there being, this study is saying literally the exact opposite, I believe, of what Mike was saying, but I don't know how relevant or large scale or what the, like, I don't know how good of a journal, the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition is. I'm not reading that like it said shit. I just don't know. I really don't know. I don't know. We got our twin studies, our twin analyses of BMI, waist circumference. UK sample of 5,092 twin pairs aged 8 to 11. So this isn't going to answer anything about like when they get older, right? Genetic influences on BMI and abdominal adiposity are high in children born since the onset of the pediatric obesity epidemic. Most of the genetic effect on abdominal adiposity is common to BMI, but 40% is attributable to independent genetic influences. What is interesting, genetic effect and independent genetic influences? Like shared versus unique genes from each person, or environmental effects are small and are divided approximately equally between shared and non-shared effects. Targeting the family may be vital for obesity prevention in the earliest years, but longer-term weight control will require a combination of individual engagement and society-wide efforts to modify the environment. Oh, genetic effect is independent genetic effect means the not heritable or not inherited genes. Is that what that means? I think. Maybe, possibly. We'll just read some of the intro, I guess. The dramatic rise in childhood obesity in the past 15 years is clearly due to changes in the environment because genes have not altered. However, not all children are obese. This difference could be due to inherited genetic differences between children or to differences in their rearing environments. Twin studies provide a unique method for disentangling nature and nurture by taking advantage of the fact that monozygotic twins share all of their genes, whereas dizygotic twins on average share half of their segregating genes. If genetic influence is important, monozygotic twins must be more similar than dizygotic twins. Twin studies can also estimate the extent to which the family environment makes family members more similar than would be expected from their genetic relatedness, the shared environment effect. This is important in the field of childhood obesity because there is considerable interest in the role of the family. Finally, twin studies can be on pitting nature against nurture to consider interaction between genes and environment. A novel type of gene-environment interaction is a change in the relative influences of genes and environment after major changes in the environment. A 1997 review of published adult twin and adoption studies found that variation in BMI was largely due to heritable genetic differences. Studies published since 1997 have reached the same conclusion, with heritability estimates in adults ranging from 55% to 85%. Twin studies also show that most of the non-genetic effect comes from environmental factors that are unique to each person, so non-shared environmental effects, and not from the shared family context. So I'm guessing unique environment is probably what takes over after you leave the household, I'm guessing. And shared environment is the family household, I'm guessing. This observation has been confirmed by results from adoption studies. Contrary to widespread assumptions of the influence of the family environment, living in the same home in childhood appears to confer little similarity in adult BMI beyond that expected from the degree of genetic resemblance. Widespread assumptions about the influence of the family environment living in the same home in childhood appears to confer little similarity in adult BMI beyond that expected from the degree of genetic resemblance. Okay, maybe this is kind of what he's talking about, maybe. One limitation of existing twin studies is that many were carried out in adults from the family home. It's not a contemporary environment. It's shared. Abdominal obesity is increasing faster than BMI in pediatric populations. This increase has serious health implications because visceral fat appears to be the primary cause of obesity-related health risks. Twin studies make it possible to assess the heritability of abdominal fatness and also discover whether genetic influences Knowledge from study examined the heritability of abdominal adiposity in children since the prevalence of that condition began to spring upward. We quantified the genetic environment. Okay, fuck me. Listen, I just need a smarter gene guy to do this, okay?
to eat hyper-palatable food all the time when they're younger, it definitely affects them when they're older, on the margins, 100%. But it doesn't affect their proclivity to make the same choices when they grow up.
Holy fuck, we're really only halfway through this? I've been streaming for 4 hours. Oh,
They're going to start eating healthy and thinking of the future as soon as they become teenagers, just like their actual mom and dad did. And then they're going to have extra adiposity and struggle with it. However, unless you become profoundly obese as a child, childhood overweightness generally resolves itself as teens mature into adults, because unless you continue on the path of egregious overeating, more or less you can grow out of considerable chubbiness as you get older.
I would like
Now,
to see the data.
Yeah, sure.
How many like kids that are obese and what their rates into adulthood are.
Sure.
I don't know what the
I don't feel like that's true. How many obese children get to normal BMI? Around 55% of obese children go on to be obese in adolescence. Around 80% of obese adolescents will still be obese in adulthood, and around 70% will be obese over the age of 30. Damn. I wonder what childhood is as opposed to adolescence here, because I think you can I don't know how accurate BMI is for like little kids, how much it matters for little kids. Although, I mean, it still matters, I guess, yeah. Okay, whatever. All right.
Sure.
Do you know what they are?
Not offhand, no. But things that happen to you in childhood can affect you long term, but don't seem to affect you long term nearly as much as people would think, because your genetics become more and more an effector variable that's better and better detected as you get older.
In deciding,
Like that might be true, that as you get older, genetics become more detectable, but I don't think that that is at ends with the fact that things in your childhood can severely impact you. I just feel like what he's saying that's not true. I think they're called ACEs in psychology, right? Adverse childhood events that can have like deleterious negative impacts on you that are really easy to measure. Like if you've had a certain number of these, you have like, there's a pretty high correlation that you have like more heart disease even, or other things, but I don't know.
causation, right? We think about changing a variable, randomizing it, and seeing what happens. If I could wave a magic wand right now and stop food companies from advertising to children hyper-processed foods, especially in poorer areas, if I create access in food deserts, I know you don't like the term, but in areas where there's less fruits, vegetables for sale, and I sell more of those foods, less of the ultra-processed foods.
Mike addressed it earlier. He claimed that ACE studies don't control for genetics. So is the idea that childhood traumatic experiences are like genetically passed on, or?
Even through an authoritative method. If I greatly improve mental health support, maybe even medication in poorer areas.
What's the mental health thing have to do with it?
The mental health thing is that some people overeat as a way of coping through difficult moments.
It's because they have high food drive, and that's a very happy thing for them to do. That's profoundly genetic. Many people in their most stressful time cannot eat.
Sure, but it still doesn't change the fact that when they're sad, they eat. And if they're more likely to be sad in an area where they can get help for a mental health
I think these
condition.
people also eat when they're happy.
Probably
Celebratory eating is a cultural universal.
It is, but I'm talking about the poorer outcomes where there's worse social outcomes and there's worse mental health support.
Yeah, what I'm saying is people with a high food drive don't need any stress to eat more. They don't need any less stress to eat
I don't like
less.
doing the highs or lows because that's not representative of the average.
We're not talking about the average. We're talking distinctly about highs and lows because we're talking about poverty versus wealth and its effects on obesity. It is a conversation exclusively of highs and lows. Because
Yeah, but if it's a normal distribution, like are poor people just clustered in the bottom, like your third deviation away from like what? That's kind of weird. If conscientiousness is normally distributed. Fuck. This conversation would be so much better if they had actual like charts and models and papers and everything in front of them. Like, yeah.
in the average, actually, you can't disaggregate anything, and who knows what's going on.
Yeah, I'm saying in the average human, not, let's say you don't know and you're blinded to what people's poverty level is. You have to create a graph of what the average is.
Sure. So you're saying a lower degree of mental health on average causes people to become more obese.
Yeah, I think it's a factor.
Is that
I think it's a
substantiated by the
correlative
literature?
factor.
Okay. Is there like a thing where like
Well,
with-
ACEs, that's like the emotional regulation of it all correlates very strongly with people who have issues of crime, issues of overeating, higher rates of blood pressure.
Do you think Good Mike is doing a good job of pushing back? I mean, kind of, but he doesn't have the exact research that Evil Mike is mentioning. So how do you even push back, right? Like it's
Elevations. So those variables are there. I don't know about the twin studies because I've never looked at those. But my point was that if you wave a magic wand and you fix all those issues that I discussed, you don't think there will be a significant improvement in obesity in poor areas?
I think the improvement in nearly all factors would be very impressive and hugely helpful. Locally, not systemically, because you have all sorts of really nasty side effects like drug dealers who deal in food and not actual drugs because now tasty food is illegal. And
Well, I
millions
didn't
of
say make
people
it
still
illegal.
want
I said reduce and improve education.
How do you reduce it if you don't make it illegal?
You limit targeted marketing.
Okay.
it needs to be just way more heavy. Targeted marketing, I don't think about it. I think you need to like tax. You need to have economic incentives tied to these things. I think it's way more important.
Because that's so influential and that's outside of our control. There's ways that food companies change what we eat without ever us even realizing that they're doing it. It's the invisible hand.
Yeah. So I guess then
Changing government policy.
Sure. Food companies wouldn't be. People wouldn't know as much about tasty junk food because food companies don't advertise them. So you'll have people who take advantage of that, and let's say in the ghetto, and bring to young children for sale healthy.
Why? What did I even? What did I even tweet this for? I have so many banger tweets that I don't even remember. Do I have any fans with Parkinson's disease? Curious how many I need to get together for Twitch to change their website name. Did somebody change their name because of a... Was this like a team or somebody changing their name? Or what the fuck is this even in response to? I tweeted this in December of 2020. Oh, fuck, that scar just got opened. They were trying to say that you shouldn't use the term blind playthrough of video games because a blind playthrough is ableist. Ugh. Okay.
About tasty junk food because food companies don't advertise them. So you'll have people who take advantage of that, and let's say in the ghetto, and bring to young children for sale healthy treats unhealthy treats they've never seen, and those kids are like, well, what is that? Like Cheez-Its. You ever had Cheez-Its?
I'm sure that.
I mean, like, that's fine. If you want to do black market snack buying, go for it. But you're going to do way less. You're going to eat way less of that food than if it's available in a fucking store. And it's going to be way more expensive, right?
It'll happen.
It'll happen.
But the
because
question is,
people
what will
want the
happen
food.
to the number?
Yeah, I think it'll go down. I think these if they magic wand it, it'll be helpful for sure. Here's my contention. There are a huge fraction of people, usually on the political left,
Like, I don't like these huge fraction. Oh, now he's just talking politics, whatever. It's more acceptable here.
or just moderate, reasonable people who have been educated in the United States or the Western world, who believe that these variables of social effect, food companies, etc., are, if not only the only variables, that very close to the predominant variables. They expect the magic wand of external social factors to be waved and fix almost the whole problem, if not the whole problem entirely. What you're going to get is almost an inversion of that reality, where you'll get like a very serious improvement, 5, 10, 15, 20% of improvement in the problem. And you'll have like 80% of the problem still left over, and be wondering why, since we have these amazing educational programs, these amazing programs of reducing food advertising, mental health enhancement, so on and so forth, that some people are still demographically much more likely to be obese than others. It is because we ignored the two most primary causative variables, which is conscientiousness.
I agree with this 100%. I think sometimes people think that I talk about this a lot when it comes to like crime. People are like, if we can get rid of all of the systemic racism in the criminal enforcement system, I think we'll fix like the the disparity between, you know, white and black incarceration or whatever. And like, you could probably spend billions of dollars working on that, and you might like fix like 4% of it, maybe. It's probably just not that much of a factor. Same thing with like racial discrimination in, you know, we need to fix racial discrimination in schools between teachers, or whatever, and maybe you'll fix like 5%. It's probably some absurdly low figure. This is why I'm always a huge advocate of like, if there are things, and this is also what's so frustrating, if there are things that you know you can throw money at and you can get like good results, like empirically, then these are the things that should be like the no-brainers. The two, I always cite these, I should have studies on here for these, but the two that I'm aware of, I believe, fuck it, we can do it now, we're not doing anything, is I think it's air conditioner and food for kids in school. Let's see. Let's see if I can find, okay, free food, school, children, educational outcome. See if I'm making it up or not. Destiny, why do you complain on the lack of stats on these kinds of videos? Why give attention to it instead of actual online lectures on these subjects? Would explaining stats not tank viewership? I don't care, then tank the viewership then. I don't like all these fucking retards that walk around, like Joe Rogan and Lex and all these guys are like, oh, actually, society's done with sound bites. They want good long-form discussions. No, they don't. They just want a 3-hour sound bite. If you want to have a good long-form discussion, then have some research, have some studies, like really dive into a thing. Don't just use like broad, you know, brush strokes to make, you know, 400 TikTok clips from a single video instead of 3, right? If you want to have a long discussion, then have a real long discussion, but it can't be like all broad and general bullshit, I think. Okay, universal free school meals. Ooh, August 9th, 2024. And school student outcomes, a systematic review. This systematic review of 6 studies comprising more than 11,000 schools. Implementation of UFSM was associated with increased lunch, 3 studies, and breakfast, 1 study participation. No change or modestly improved attendance, and decreased obesity prevalence and suspensions. The association with lunch participation had a moderate certainty of evidence, while the other associations had low or very low certainty of evidence. Okay, so this that they were measuring. Associated with increased lunch and breakfast participation. Okay. Okay, so it had to do, they measured attendance, obesity, and suspensions. And school and student outcomes in the U.S. An expert panel informed protocol was developed to evaluate intervention, cohort studies, comparing from August 2012. Included meal. Okay, the outcomes included meal participation rates, attendance, dietary intake and quality, food waste, economic impact, food insecurity, anthropometrics, disciplinary actions, stigma, and shaming. Why not? Why not educational outcomes? Okay. Destiny, I had free food available in school, but I almost never ate. I went to the store and bought energy drinks and pastries. You're clearly not who we're talking about then. School-wide free meal programs for better classrooms, outcomes for students. What do we have here? Okay. Okay. First, school-wide free meals increase the number of school breakfasts and lunches served, obviously. Improve math performance in districts where relatively low or where relatively few students qualified. under the income-based program. Okay. Within these districts, elementary and Hispanic students experience the largest academic improvements. Figure 1 summarizes how free meals through CEP affect math performance among different groups of students in these districts with low free meal participation before CEP. In this figure, the height of the bar shows the estimated impacts, and the vertical lines show the 90% confidence interval. I find that overall math performance improved about 0.016 standard deviation, so not too much. Let's see. Okay, overall elementary and just Hispanic children. Significantly reduced suspensions among white male elementary students. Damn, white people be beating each other up for food. Okay, there needs to be more research on this. This is the food thing I've heard, and then the air conditioner thing, I think. Let's see what this is. Oh, NBER, my favorite thing. Paper publisher research. What would you call NBER? Like, you wouldn't call it a think tank, right? It's not a journal. What would you call it? PSAT scores are lower after hotter school days. Change in PSAT scores is with one more school day in designated temperature range rather than baseline range. Why aren't the food programs universal? Seems way easier if there's set funding to feed all students for the year. I don't know, Republicans. Cumulative heat exposure over the course of school years with a lower level of student learning and the presence of classroom air conditioning system really wipes out this negative effect. Baseline of temperature range. What is a PSAT graded out of? $1550? What is PSAT score graded? 1520? Wait, is the score change really just like at the worst negative, like it's 0.75 points lower? Or is this percentage points? Those are, oh, no. These are probably standard, maybe standard deviation changes, not point changes. Okay, maybe that's, okay. I was going to say, that's kind of, gotcha, all right. Okay. This is the air conditioning thing I'm familiar with, but all right.
And
what? How much? 5 hours. Okay. We're finishing this video. Oh boy.
And food drive. If you have low food drive, it doesn't matter how conscientious you are or not, you're probably not going to be overweight because like food's just not as big of a deal. If you have a very high food drive and you're very wealthy, you can deploy quite a bit of technologies and personal chefs and all that stuff. You'll almost certainly be significantly more overweight than otherwise, but maybe less so. If you have very high food drive and you have a low degree of conscientiousness, you're going to be very, very, very overweight. And all of the sociological variables in the world cannot help you to a huge extent. They can help you to a moderate extent. We're going to have so much left on the table.
I feel like your environment would dramatically alter this, no? Like, let's say you literally just didn't, let's say, like, if you lived in a starving society, it literally wouldn't matter what the genetic variables are. You would never be fat because you would literally just starve unless you eat your neighbors, I guess.
You'll be wondering why. So what I'm proposing, this is why I'm so passionate about the subject, is I like to take holistic approaches. I like to understand the landscape of the entire issue we're dealing with before going and rendering very, very confident conclusions. For example, if you look at the British public schooling system,
Yikes.
there's some public schools that are not so great, I guess, and some public schools that are just unbelievable. And the recent, this is quoting Robert Plomin's work, behavioral geneticist.
Okay, at least we have now we have a name and something more specific. That's good.
Behavioral genetic analysis of childhood success in school and after, especially after school, has there's the quality of schooling, quote unquote, by ranked school systems in the United Kingdom that you received has almost no predictive effect on how successful you become. And when you see that, and this is insanely rigorous data, what do you have to shake off the page to make sense of that? Because when I read that for the first time, I was like, I almost stopped the car. It was an audiobook, and I was like, the fuck? How? Like, it was supposed to be a thing that you inject education into people, and they just get better. And all of a sudden, when gradations of public schools explain almost no variance for outcomes after, and there's programs where they rotated kids to different schools, lots of variation, it has almost no effect. If you knew behavioral genetics in its aggregate before that, you could have been like, I could have told you that. And then you would have been like, okay, we should have predicted this wasn't going to be a big deal. How do we really address these issues and understand what is the realism with which?
If Good Mike isn't familiar with any of these studies, I don't know how he could ever even push back against any of this, right?
Which we can approach the situation. If you didn't know about behavioral genetics, you would have been like, dude, we need tons of funding for all of these programs. And maybe that's a good thing, but then you would have expected it to work. And when it worked on the margins, but not in its entirety, you would have had to contend with the fact that I think we've severely misunderstood the problem. A quick analogy just for folks who are listening.
Okay.
If you are under the myth that genetics are not the biggest factor in athletic performance, you can take a scrawny little Jewish kid and try to get him into every single soccer camp in the world. I'm a billionaire. My kid's going to learn soccer from like the Brazilian national team themselves, day one. You poured millions of dollars into your kid, and he's like 16 years old. He's the worst person on his non-select soccer team, and he's like, I want to play the violin. And you're like, the fuck? I thought I could pour athletic talent into you. And any sports scientist, to paraphrase Jordan Peterson, worth their salt, it's a hilariously Canadian expression, would say like, that's not
Wait, is being worth your salt? Is that a Canadian expression? The fuck?
how that works. Sports science is about identifying talent and then improving it on the margins, sort of cultivating it. If you don't have the talent, you ain't doing a whole lot. Now you can.
I really don't like the sports analogy here because I feel like the sports is like a competitive thing. Like, this is how much better are you than other people at like winning a thing. Like, in society, we're not competing against each other for lowest body weight unless you're having like an eating disorder competition, with some teenage girls to see who can throw up the most at lunch or whatever. Like, it's like everybody could theoretically have a healthy BMI. Not everybody can be competitive in some athletic event in high school or college or beyond. Like, I don't know what I feel because the question shouldn't be like, is he competitive or is he the worst member on his team? It should be, is he significantly improved versus if he had no training whatsoever, right? But I don't know. One thing that I will say, and I want to stress this a million fucking times. So I saw somebody in chat say this, hard work is far more determinative than genetics. This is the reason why I don't like the nature versus nurture distinction, is because hard work might matter more than genetics, but how much you can work or are willing to work or how easy it is to do that work also has a heavy genetic determining factor. And then like how much you improve will be based off of like the work you do as well. So these things like they feed into each other, right? Like being able to do the work and then having the genetic drive to work and then putting in the work and then improving. Like it's very hard to just separate out like genes versus environment. Like all of it kind of feeds into itself, like a guy that is a natural, like you could probably take somebody that even has like a higher, I don't know what would be the most skill you would need to play StarCraft or whatever. or what skills you're looking at. But like you could have somebody who's like genetically more suitable to being a high level StarCraft 2 player, but like doesn't like video games. That person will probably never outperform somebody who's just like, who likes to play the game a lot and is decently genetically capable of it, right? Because that person's going to be willing to put in way more hours a lot easier. Whereas the other person, it just doesn't have the like the inclination for it, whether that's environmental, genetic, whatever. So like the hard work for him is going to look a lot different, you know?
Get better, but it's a similar thing to the poverty obesity thing. If we addressed all of the sort of endemic issues that you were talking about, the systemic ones, external social cultural ones, we would get some decent traction. Yeah, you coach a kid in soccer with a Brazilian national team his whole life, he's going to be pretty goddamn good at soccer, but he ain't going to the Olympics. No way, unless he has mega talent.
Sure.
The same is true about poverty and obesity and those relationships, where if we don't address the food noise, which luckily pharmaceutical companies are addressing now with Ozempic, which I think one of the best things we can do is make anorectic drugs like Ozempic and tirzepatide, et cetera, ubiquitously.
Hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard is the meme quote. Agree/disagree. I mean, like I agree-ish, but there's like huge differences between different kinds of environments. I'm speaking a little bit out of, I think, what I'm super confident on, but like, here's what I think I would generalize. I feel like there are a lot of academic environments that are very heavily G-loaded, meaning that if you are naturally somebody that you just have a much higher IQ, that even with not that much work, you could outperform somebody that's willing to put in quite a bit of work, but is significantly lower IQ than you are. But once you escape these like academic environments where it's like standardized tests and other forms of like G-loaded material, and you get into working environments, things that didn't matter as much in school, I think now become way more important in a working environment. I feel like working environments are more work-loaded than just G-loaded. Like, if you, so I mean, I can give an example of this, right? Imagine a kid with a very, very, very high IQ who just skips class sometimes, but he's able to like look over the notes and he can do shit. He shows up and he does fine on the tests, as opposed to another kid who, you know, he's studying as best he can and, you know, he's a B student. He's just not an A student. If both of those guys graduate from school and then they go into a working environment, if you're skipping meetings, if you can't show up to work on time, if you can't deliver on a reliable timetable, it really doesn't matter how smart you are. Like, unless you're like a top 0.0001%, not top 1%, top 0.0001%. And even at that, it might not matter. The person that outworks you is just going to be a better employee. You would always rather work with that person who can respond to an email on time, who will show up to meetings, who will be there to do the work. It doesn't matter how naturally bright the other person is if they can't like show up and do the work. So I feel like you have to separate out sometimes expectations from like school environments that I think are more G-loaded, because you're not necessarily like doing a ton of work in like a work-related environment. Like you can't, like you could cram for stuff or whatever more. Although I mean, it depends on maybe the type of school stuff too. But as opposed to work environments that I feel like are going to be a little bit less G-loaded or more like work-loaded or something. I don't know, the work phenotype would be my guess.
Cheap and available to everyone that needs them. That's going to make a big hit. Why? Because it addresses directly the variable of food drive. Trait conscientiousness remains. There is no drug you can take that improves it, unfortunately. And it's going to remain this kind of sand grain inside that makes the pearl.
Isn't that why conscientiousness is a better trait than IQ to measure? I've just never seen anything. He's obsessed with this conscientiousness trait. I don't know if there's a new audiobook he read or something, but I just haven't heard of this correlation as much. I'm pretty sure if you could boost one thing in your life to be successful, I think IQ is like the one that you want to do. I think it's just correlated with so many other positive outcomes. I don't, he's really into this conscientiousness thing, but I don't know. I just haven't heard of it as much, I guess. I don't know.
It's a constant nuisance that will constantly be there, and we can have a lot of sociological, we're just not doing enough. You know, education didn't work that well. We need more education. To your point earlier, like vitamin D, once you get enough of it, 10 times the dose is technically toxic over the long term. Sure, shit doesn't help. So we have to understand the entire topography, the landscape of what we're dealing with, and have to accept straight up that many of the core, most explanatory reasons for why poverty and obesity correlate with each other are outside of our ability to have traction on them in the modern timeline and going.
Yeah, but you can affect the outcomes of people with like low conscientiousness. So you can affect the outcomes of people with these types of, I don't want to say genetic defects, but like these like personality traits, no? Or I'm curious if do they ever get to where they offer solutions?
And from there, we should make all of the changes that you recommend, which I'm absolutely 100% on board. Depending on how they're executed, of course.
Yeah.
That all stuff matters, but it's going to matter a lot less than many people think. I can't speak for you and tell you how much you think it's going to matter, but because of what we know about behavioral genetics and how causality works in this case, it's going to matter substantially less than you think. And if anything else, it's disheartening. You did all this stuff, and then what happened? Almost nothing.
I think that's the only point we disagree on. I think the trait matter of it all, the food drive of it all, you created this 80-20 guesstimation.
He said Ozempic access would be good. Well, yeah, but like there's got to be a better, I mean, why does it have to be just Ozempic? Like, I don't understand why we can't like heavily modify environments as well, like in the form of like a heavy sugar taxation thing or other types of like access to, like, I feel like school lunch is that's like a good no-brainer, right? So let's say you're in environments where the school is giving you food, like you're guaranteed at least to have that be a relatively healthy meal.
Formula. I can't even argue against it because I don't have the evidence to argue against it.
Oof. Oh no.
And I don't think that you would even fight if someone said it's 70-30.
No, sure,
Right?
no
because
problem.
it's almost an arbitrary
Yeah,
number because
it
we
could
don't
be
have
30
self.
I wouldn't say it's an arbitrary number. Just because you don't know exactly what a thing is doesn't mean it's arbitrary. It can't be anything. We would have like a degree of probability of like where that answer would lie, right?
70.
Exactly, yeah. But I do believe that these traits matter. The way that I think about it as a practical clinician, because I'm not a researcher, is you hear that we can change the 20% with that magic wand that I was talking about, and you say, that's not the 80% that is really the issue. And I view it as 20% decrease in obesity rates gets us under the average person in America being obese.
Yeah, but if you could target that 80%, wouldn't you want to target the 80%? It'd probably be more cost effective. How was I so much funnier when I was younger? Did I steal this from somebody? Or maybe this isn't even that funny. Maybe I'm just warm to my old tweets. Based. Vyvanse turned me into a zombie. True.
That's a monster win for me. Because if we're, let's say, at 60% obesity in the United States, if we get 20% drop off, we're at 40, we're less than the majority.
Yeah, the way I'm contextualizing it, it's going to be 20% of 60. So it's going to be whatever fraction that ends up being.
I don't know what the exact number is.
Yeah.
He did the percentage points versus reduction, but I don't even think that's how it would work. It would be a 20% reduction across everybody's BMI, wouldn't it? It wouldn't be a 20% reduction off the number of people. It wouldn't be that like 20% of people are so heavily impacted that they become not obese. I imagine it would be like 20% of people or everybody would have a 20% reduction of weight in the BMI overweight and obese range. Wouldn't that be the expectation? Also, it would be technically 20% from 60% would be 20% of 60% or 20% minus 60%, and which would be 12 from 60 is 48% instead of 40% would be, but it's not relevant to any of this.
Sam, can you actually look up what percent of the United States is obese?
No. That's not my contention. I'm saying that if obesity is the problem and you solve 20% of it, you don't get an absolute 20%
Right, yeah, of
reduction.
course, yeah.
You get a relative 20% reduction.
What does this matter?
Right.
But so in any case, like, I love that point. I think I'm looking at it from a little bit of a Sowellian pessimistic take of, well, geez, like we're not even addressing the two biggest factors in the room, and it's totally fine to address all these other
we are
factors.
now.
Well, I say, as a society or whatever,
And
like
also,
policy.
just to put into perspective from like the bariatric surgery side of things, which has been ongoing for 30 years plus more than the GLP-1s.
GLP-1 is also the more realistic solution to obesity than regulations. Even in regulation land, UK/EU, we still have increasing obesity rates. We are 15 to 20% lower than you guys in America, but it all lines up to the right. Severe obesity cases are going up, which is amazing for GLP-1 targeting. Yeah, but like, who's to say, let's say that you target everybody with GLP-1s. That's just expected? Like, that's what people claimed that Adderall would become, that like you just have to take Adderall to be competitive because everybody's gonna be on it, it's gonna help everybody. Is it gonna be expected that every single person is gonna be on a GLP-1 agonist? And then also, who's to say that food can't become even more tasty and even more better? So now even people on the GLP-1 agonists are like, the food is just so good and tasty. Even they are overeating still. Like, I don't know. I don't think there's anything wrong with mass prescription of the drug. I think it's fine, but I think you have to target the food as well. It can't be that the expectation is, okay, well, the girls turn 14, 15, put them on birth control. Everybody else turns 14, 15, put them on Ozempic or Wegovy or whatever the fuck the semaglutide. Well, I don't know what the fuck it's called, but like that can't be it. That can't be the answer, I don't think. I think it's good right now in the short term, for sure, but it can't be that it's just expected that every single person will be on Ozempic and hopefully foods don't get even tastier.
The reason bariatric surgery works is partially because how it impacts your food drive.
Oh, yes, almost entirely why it works that way. Yeah.
So this is not new. Medicine trying to impact food drive. This has been going on since before I started practicing medicine.
Yeah.
And that's number one. Number two, medicine usually practices on the fringes.
Yeah.
Like when we talk about vaccinating kids and we talk about saving hundreds of lives, someone might look at that and say, I don't find it worthwhile to vaccinate kids to save hundreds of lives.
Sure.
But we do, and science does. So yes, there's very little control that we have of ultimate advantages.
Yeah.
Like when we talk about vaccinating kids and we talk about saving hundreds of lives, someone might look at that and say, I don't find it worthwhile to vaccinate kids to save hundreds of lives.
I wouldn't. Wait, are there vaccines that we mandate for the entire country just to save a couple hundred lives? My understanding is that the savings in hospitalization rates and lives is usually way more significant than just like a couple hundred kids. No? That seems like a really, really low number, unless I'm missing something, but
Sure.
But we do. And
I felt like it was COVID loaded. Even more than hundreds of kids died of COVID, no? COVID deaths, children, USA. Well, I don't even know what the overall COVID death was for kids now. But you're also not just looking at saving lives too. You're also looking at like hospitalization rates as well, which for a lot of vaccines I think is like the main saver. Like I don't think you're necessarily mass flu vaccinating people as well to save lives, although that is like a help, but it's like to avoid like the big hospitalization shit, which is a huge drag in a ton of ways. Oh, wait. Hold on. I can open this. Oh, that wasn't very exciting. Sorry. Is this from the start of the pandemic to now? No, it can't be. More than 1 million people have died, right? Last updated mandated. Okay, what is this data set? Deaths involving coronavirus disease 2019 with a focus on 0 to 18 in the US. Issued 2020-08-05. Oh, was this just for the first couple months? I don't even remember when this shit started. Make the first, oh shit. Oh wait, you're right, hold on, wait. What's the thing to right click, format? No, I wanna make it, how do I make it the right size? I want to make all of these like fit to the data size. Double click the line between the columns. Wait. Click on the upper left black box to highlight all, then double click line between columns. This? Oh. And then this. Okay. Date as of. Is this measuring all deaths then between January 1st, or I'm sorry, between January 4th and June 24th? I thought the overall COVID death, that was over 3 million. Am I crazy? Hold on. How many U.S. citizens have died COVID? Oh, no, it's not. It's 1.2 million. Wait, why did I think 3 million? What am I thinking of? Global? 3 million globally died? Okay. All right. Well, I guess for this then, over 3 years then, 3.5 years, it would have been an average of, I guess about 400 deaths per year for children. But again, we don't vaccinate just to prevent death. I'm pretty sure we do it to prevent hospitalization as well, right?
In kids, and we talk about saving hundreds of lives, someone might look at that and say, I don't find it worthwhile to vaccinate kids to save hundreds of lives.
Sure.
But we do, and science does. So yes, there's very little control that we have of ultimate human outcomes, because controlling 1, 2, 3, 4 variables in the grand scheme of life is usually ridiculous in thinking you can control the ultimate outcome.
Yeah.
Which is why I don't like protocols that say like, oh, if you ice bath, you can create X, Y, and Z. I'm like, come on, man, one variable, especially such a small variable, is not going to have some meaningful, substantial change that we should give it this much air.
Sure.
But those issues, to me, that if we can change those issues, A, we get some benefit, even if it's not the majority of the benefit. B, the obesity change isn't the only benefit that we get when we change those things. If we change education, if we change their ability to...
What do you mean by education? I'm curious. That one I have a lot of
Okay,
ideas
when
on.
someone walks in to one of my Men on the Street interviews, and I ask them a question of, like, what nutrient is most prevalent in your banana? And they say protein. The odds are that they are from a worse education background, from a health literacy standpoint, is higher. Fair to say? Mm-hmm. That happens very often in lower economic schools, education systems, because there's not as much motivation to learn about those things. So the sales of a 64-ounce Slurpee...
Where did Destiny get the idea about food intake correlation to food taste? If a food is tastier and less satiating, you're probably going to eat more of it, and you're probably going to be more prone to overeating.
...is much higher in that area than it is in Greenwich, Connecticut, some really wealthy area. Why? Partially because of education.
Nutritional education is a perfect example of a variable that is talked about as a preeminent variable. Here's one of my beefs with this. Coming up through the educational system in all of these fields, you're not really taught that, we were never taught that food drive was a thing that was largely genetically correlated. It's just never talked about. We were never taught about conscientiousness. We were taught about things like nutritional education, empowerment to make better nutritional choices, monetary limits.
I think we weren't taught about those things because we didn't know how to impact them.
When I learned about these things, they were taught as a theoretical basis for why things happen. Whether or not you can impact something is very different than theoretically does it caused by something else. And so I think the reason that they theoretically were not taught is because most people in the field didn't ask the question, because most people in those fields are intellectually biased to the political left to begin with and do not to like to look to genetics and deep social forces outside of our control.
Why? Why do you think
because it makes them very sad about the state of affairs and it disempowers them. They believe in human malleability. They believe that no one can be blamed for anything, that it's social forces externally all the way up and down.
Is your motivation behind a sugar tax to cause consumers to buy fewer sugary products or to get producers to put less sugar in their products? Both would happen, I think. I think that probably producers, food producers would have less sugar in their products. They'd find ways to do that, basically.
And those are the, if not the only, the by far predominant reasons why people end up different is because of social forces. That is like...
but don't you think they always, like, barring the extremes, most people will say that it's a mix of nature and nurture?
I'm not talking about most people. I'm talking about the educational
In the
establishment.
educational establishment. You don't think they would say that it's a mix?
No, it's you can lose your job for saying it's a mix. If I
Like for this, like now we're just on vibes. Like what's the point? Like how do we even quantify this? Is there no research done into behavioral genetics, or is there no research, like how are you citing anything? I don't know.
was still working at the university, I would never give this interview. Because saying that poor people on average have lower conscientiousness, I'm still worried about this going out. Holy fuck, that's insulting. If you're nuanced and you're smart, you can understand how it's both real and not insulting. But if you're anything else, and if you're very politically motivated, it's going to be a nuclear bomb. You're blaming people for their problems. Even though they're in private life, everyone knows people.
I don't know if you're
largely to
blaming.
blame
I think you're trying to establish a cause for.
Would there be a real difference between real sugar, or would there be a difference between real sugar and like corn syrup, or just flat tax across the board? Just tax it all. The idea that some sugars are better and that like some sugars are evil, or like high fructose corn syrup is uniquely bad, but like other types of simple sugars are much better, I think is bullshit.
or why something is developed. I don't think you're necessarily putting blame on an individual.
I totally
Whether
agree.
that person is conscientious, especially as you put it genetically, you're almost not blaming them. You're almost dissolving of the blame.
That's a very interesting way to look at it.
But aren't you? Is that
Most-
fair? Because you're saying genetically you have this predisposition to this trait, therefore it's not up to you.
I think the concept of blame is
Determinism.
one that the longer you look at it, the more it falls apart anyway. I don't like to deal in blame. I don't even know what that means. I like to deal in causality instead of blame. Blame is like an emotion.
Why do you feel sugar should be taxed differently? Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm sure. I mean, you can also tax ultra processed foods as well. I don't know how much sugar tax would just affect that, but whatever the things that are the worst for us, find ways to tax them more. Americans' calorie consumption hasn't increased over time. How do we not? How can our weight be increasing over time if caloric consumption isn't increasing over time?
Emotion you have inside from ancestral times when the police and court system were not there to enforce things, and by blaming someone, you could paint them in a negative light and interact with
I
them.
feel
less.
like
As sad as it is, I don't think that there is much evidence that moving around more. I think I think that movement and exercise is a really good way to improve your health in a variety of ways. But I don't think it's not going to have the biggest impact on your weight. It's not going to have much of an impact, I don't think, almost at all, I think, on weight related stuff. I think for that, you have to like target the diet on stuff like that.
we're going to get into this no matter what. Do you believe in free will?
No.
Oh, cool.
And I think that, yeah, sure. But I think the concept of free will is preposterous on its face because people say, well, what about quantum mechanics and randomness? Because that's random will. It's still not free will. So I don't think there is a space for free will as most people understand it in a modern intellectual landscape.
Is sugar inelastic good? I feel like people buying sugary products tend to buy it regardless of cost because it's a large portion of how they derive happiness, much like alcohol. I disagree. I think that sugar is probably highly elastic because as long as there's other food you can buy, I'm sure it's quite elastic.
But at the same time, in your brain, you have a machine that decides what you're going to think, which is out of your control entirely. And you have a part of that machine which reviews all the contents of your mind and decides on aggregate, am I going to make this decision that I just thought of or not? And so the combination of having self-awareness and an ability to take all the information you know and aggregate it to not just my recent proclivity, but also everything else I know, certainly makes a system that acts as if it has free will. But you really lens down into it. It's not free at all. It's entirely mechanistic.
So what would you say people watching this that you're afraid of that they'll say about you?
I don't give a fuck. That's
Well,
why I'm
no,
here.
but you're saying that you're worried about it going out. What are you worried about? Or why would you get fired?
Yeah. Mike's,
If you were still working.
Mike's a Nazi.
Come on.
You don't think exercise like cardio or NEAT are major variables to weight loss? No, they're just not. I'm sorry. If you do like if you're like a fucking Olympian level athlete, maybe. But my understanding is that right now the current research basically shows that whatever level of exercise you're at, your body like more or less burns similar-ish calories per day, maybe slightly more. When I say slightly, like less than 10 or 5% more per day, but you're not like significantly, not enough to like truly impact your weight. That like 95% or more of your weight loss is going to come through things like adjustments to diet.
Come on, for real.
No, I'm serious. Check your comments. Check them now.
But in reality, you think they would call you a Nazi?
Yes.
And why would they call you a Nazi?
Because the Nazis took the idea that people had genetic differences that impacted their behavior and decided the end run best way to deal with that was to kill millions. I think there's a really big problem with the
And
kill
are you
millions
that?
part. Do I have to answer directly?
But doesn't adding muscle increase your metabolism? Like barely, not that much. I don't think. No, not enough for it to be significantly impactful of anything. No.
that impacted their behavior and decided the end run best way to deal with that was to kill millions. I think there's a really big problem with
players.
the
And are you
millions
that?
part.
The haze.
Do I have to answer directly?
Yes.
Yes. Israel. That'd be a fun Nazi name. I am a politically very
Then why would I want to work out? You should work out because it has huge benefits to your physical health and huge benefits to your emotional health. And I think that having more muscle in general, I think is like a big protective factor down the line for other types of things. Like I think it can impact things like bone density. I think it can impact things like how likely you're to be injured in like an event, like if you fall over something as an old person. Obviously things like cardiovascular health and mental health and other things are improved. Like exercise dramatically improves all of these things, but you just exercising for weight loss is basically never, it's always a loser of a thing. There's a lot of people that are ask Pain in chat about it. I'm not even gonna argue this one. Go fucking read it. If you want to link a thing in chat, go for it. Or you can just be ask Pain in chat, or you can be ask Pain in chat, go look it up later. I don't really give a fuck. I'm pretty sure I'm not wrong on this. The reason why nobody's like anything, okay?
closely aligned with libertarians. I'm a secular humanist. And so I think anytime a complex human being dies, it is an unmitigated tragedy. I think that killing people and putting them into camps is abysmal. But you can reason yourself through sociological effects only to the same.
Diet is always better than exercise for everything, including health. For everything? No, there are things that you can do that you get from exercise that you can't get eating. You can't build muscle. You can't. There are types of ways that you improve like bone density and shit. Cardiovascular health, stuff like this. Like you can't get this by just eating. You have to like exercise and move your body into it, right?
Thing, tragedy. I think that killing people and putting them into camps is abysmal. But you can reason yourself through sociological effects only to the same thing. Evidence, Joseph Stalin and Mao Zedong. They didn't believe genetics had any effect on anything. They believed it was all sociological. What did they do? Put people into camps, toast them by the tens of millions.
You can weaponize any philosophy.
Oh, yeah, sure.
To any extreme.
But if you're on one extreme or the other, you tend to weaponize the
opposite. Yeah. But you're still extreme,
for
but
sure.
still weaponized.
It just so happens that most of the community, the intellectual community in the United States, the collegiate intellectual community, is wildly left-wing biased for a generation and for 3 generations now. The problem is getting, let's say, if it's a problem, it's getting worse. It's becoming more and more of a thing that the campuses are attracting more and more left-leaning people. And so when we're talking about looking at this from a grander landscape of what really is the cause and effect situation for why poor people tend to be obese more on average, you're getting a very, very biased view from most of the academic establishment. They neither teach the basic theoretics of it. If you bring it up in class, you're lambasted as like having borderline Nazi thoughts,
But
and
like,
the whole
if
thing.
you bring up food
One thing that I don't like when people say things like this is people always assume, I wonder if he'll bring this up. I hope he brings this up, and then it's a true pre-watch. People assume that if academics were perfectly politically neutral, that 50% would be conservative and 50% would be liberal. I feel like in these conversations, they never discuss, well, what are the chances that one side could just be more factually accurate on a given issue than the other side, right? Let's say, because if it was the case that Republicans were actually mostly correct about this, then you would want most people to be conservative, right? Or if Democrats are mostly correct about this, you'd want more of them to be like liberal, right? I feel like it's always assumed that 50% is the correct answer to this, but
drive, people will call you a Nazi. I don't understand how that happens.
If you say food drive is mostly genetic, the right-wingers will say you're excusing people's willpower thing,
Okay.
and the left-wingers will, in some situations, be like, see, but then when you tie genetics to other factors, let's say racial factors, they're like, holy shit, Hitler reborn. There are lots of people, the world has many beautiful things about it. There's many ugly things about it. And when you go, hey, this ugly stuff we should be looking at, there are lots of people that go, yeah. And there are lots of people that go, you son of a bitch, how dare you? And as intellectual, every college campus says they're for intellectual curiosity and freedom of speech and freedom of thought. And in the United States, almost none is or isn't. You and I could sit here and really make fools of ourselves and get canceled by going, what was Hitler right about? He was right about a lot of shit, right? He was a fucking murderous animal who was wrong about the core tenets of his philosophy. But he had all the stuff that was correct.
okay.
Order, social responsibility, personal responsibility, pride in the greatness of your nation. It's fucking awesome stuff.
Yeah, okay, but like there's a lot of people that say that without getting there through like Nazism, right?
We don't need to jettison that, but people tend to feel so much more than they think in many regards that, like, as soon as you bring up, oh, I'm doing free thought, I'm doing cost-benefit analysis, let's look at Churchill, Hitler, and Stalin and see how their philosophies differ, cost-benefit, pluses and minuses. That intellectual exercise is damn near forbidden on college campuses today. So the idea that we have free thought is largely been jettisoned. Like, I went to the University of Michigan as an undergrad, a phenomenal institution, but damn near a propaganda machine. When I went there, they're like trying to get you to believe a certain version of the world that felt really nice for people on the political left to believe. And so they jettisoned entire classes.
Yeah, like he's right conceptually here. I don't know if he's gone too far to the other side. People are very quick to have like their normative values. So whatever ethical statements they believe in, and then they work backwards from there, and they'll eject anything that doesn't comport with those. So if it is the case that some population of people just has a genetic proclivity towards something, that answer is unacceptable because it feels bad, and then they eject it. But it's also the same on the other end too. For like, there were a lot of like people on the left will never accept answers relating to population groups or whatever having genetic proclivity towards certain traits, right? Which is, it's probably true. Now, what is the impact, or I'm sorry, what is the magnitude? And then, you know, what can you do to mitigate those in an environment is a totally different question. However, like everybody on the right for a long time also said that like men are just better than women at school because we're just like more equipped to learn, but they've switched a lot to well, actually it's an environmental argument. Schooling is an environmental thing. Men need to be outside to learn. We need to be more physical. We're not designed to sit in classrooms all day. That's why little boys are being ADHD diagnosed all the time. It's not fair, right? So when the data changed, the opinion didn't change, because the normative value is just that, well, no, hold on, that it has to be that men are more equipped than women. Now there has to be an environmental reason, and that's why they're scoring lower, whereas before it was genetic. Like when we were winning, it's just a biological reality that men are better than women at schools. But now that we're losing, well, now it must be an environmental thing. Like people will change because it's fucking retarded.
Of introspection and trying to figure out what's going on, such as behavioral genetics, such as true cultural differences and where they stem from. They had an idea that you could re-architect external society to make any change that you wanted. That idea is wrong. It's always...
You cannot run a bad diet. 1 large fry equals 500 calories equals 1 hour of intense exercise. I don't think an ordinary human being can exercise away 500 calories in an hour. That's like Michael Phelps level. That's a lot. You're doing a lot. You're like fucking scaling the Empire State Building.
Always been wrong, but it's not completely wrong. It's partially correct. There's, like to your point earlier, it has some traction. You can change society, make people's lives better, even if they're the same people. But what you should expect out of that is a much more mixed picture. There's a lot of situations where you think the core variable is social, you pour tons of social resources into it, it changes up to a point, then it doesn't change anymore, and your answer is like, well, we just need more social stuff, and that is the wrong answer. But if you're not willing to admit that this other thing even exists, what the hell do you do afterwards? That's a real curious situation.
Yeah, I guess the real research that I would like to see is what can we do to impact this trait?
Like food drive and conscientiousness, respectively?
Yeah, well, food drive, we kind of have some, at least beginnings of evidence for.
Correct, yeah.
But for conscientiousness, as an example.
And you can ask the same thing about intelligence. Probably the single most beneficial thing you can have. I always go back and forth in my head as to which one is more effectual, conscientiousness or intelligence. But together, they are the single biggest effective variables for everything else that happens in your life. If you are intelligent and conscientious, above average, you're going to be doing some really interesting shit. If you are significantly below average in conscientiousness and intelligence, there's a high probability you're going to be in jail or highly unaccomplished and poor and making...
Okay, hold on. Sorry, just real quick, because I'm perma-banning for just the most retarded shit that I see. Destiny, you can easily do 500 plus running a 10K, which most decent runners can do in less than an hour. So you're perma-ban. What percentage of Americans do you think can run a 5K? What an absolutely fucking retarded thing to put in chat. Holy shit. This guy, 1 hour of easy cardio is 600 calories. Bye. See you later. 600 calories, bro? Get the fuck out of here. Holy shit.
Terrible decisions all the time. If you ask the question of how do we increase people's conscientiousness and increase their intelligence, some of the answers are very straightforward. A cultural reinforcement of high conscientiousness. Like, hey, save your money. It's better to think of the future, things like that. But now the political left in some extremes is so insane that even trying to say that to people is considered paternalistic. And
yeah, but there's the exact opposite happening on the right-wing side where it's weaponized in the other direction.
Totally. Equally as unhelpful.
What I probably should have asked very early on in this conversation that I didn't is when you say that there is a genetic tie to the trait of conscientiousness, what is that gene that you're looking at, that you're describing? Because to me, when we look at a trait, that is something that we've sort of elucidated on tests, but what actual gene are you looking at?
All of these traits, anything having to do with traits like personality stuff, are going to be super polygenetic. There's going to be like hundreds of genes that control for any of these things. Which I'm sure this Dr. Good Mike will know, and Evil Mike will probably know.
Sort of elucidated on tests, but what actual gene are you looking at?
But and also, I don't know why this matters. Fuck, but now I'm reading chat too. Have they talked about changing environmental stuff yet?
So it's almost certainly polygenic, which means hundreds, if not thousands or more genes are responsible. This is true for intelligence. There's no intelligence gene. but there are lots of genes that have small fractional mini percentages effect on intelligence, and in the aggregate, they make you much smarter or much less intelligent. Conscientiousness is the same. You can track a lot of what conscientiousness is and how it acts by analogizing to child development. Every single 2-year-old is the least conscientious thing you'll ever meet in your life. They don't have the neural architecture to think of the future, mostly because they
Wait, who?
genes that have small fractional mini percentages effect on intelligence, and in the aggregate, they make you much smarter or much less intelligent. Conscientiousness is the same. You can track a lot of what conscientiousness is and how it acts by analogizing to child development. Every single 2-year-old is the least conscientious thing you'll ever meet in your life. They don't have the neural architecture to think of the future, mostly because they don't have a well-developed prefrontal cortex.
Sure.
So prefrontal cortical development is probably really, really tied causatively to conscientiousness. So if you had some wacky idea to genetically engineer people and you found a way through 150 genes to push the prefrontal cortex into more aggressive development, accounting for skull size, et cetera, then that would probably be something that would be a fruitful, like if someone's profoundly athletic and has an amazing sense of balance, they probably have a larger, more well-integrated cerebellum because that is the seat for that kind of action. So these are all just like the brain is a computer. These are all computer properties of the brain.
Thinking about traits like this historically has been problematic. You mentioned the Nazis.
Yeah. That's
How
not
they
what they did that
weaponized
was a
it.
problematic thing. What they did is just killed millions of people.
Right. Based off of that logic.
Sure.
Again, their action is the issue.
Yes.
Self-esteem era of the 1990s elucidated that having high self-esteem was a big contributing trait that led to success from childhood. So we instituted participation trophies, praising children even when they're failing, creating a higher level of narcissism that perhaps didn't exist before. And largely, we've seen it as a failure of modern psychology of trying to institute false
Very
self-esteem.
well-intentioned and very from the political left.
Very well-intentioned. And frankly, I don't care which side it comes from.
Just to keep in mind the idea that this is not the first political left thing to come up to the surface to where there's an orthodoxy that you're supposed to accept.
Yeah, but there's
is
a
just
right-wing
wrong.
version of that in the past
The
that has
right-wing
happened.
people do not run the universities. There are two types
Okay,
of
they
people.
run the government now.
Do they? Well, they
Literally every part of the government. Supreme Court, Congress, Senate.
we won't get into so
legislative
something
branch.
like 90% of actual government workers, not accounting for police and military, politically on the left. Just to keep that in the discussion. So the deep state on the extreme is an insane right-wing conspiracy, but in a more reasonable take, like, yes, most people who actually work in government of all levels are Democrats. And so when Republicans are in charge, they're dealing with a largely antagonistic workforce.
Which is great because
Wait, is that true? That most people that work in government are Democrats? Is there a way to find that out? Oh, wait. It also depends on what level of government we're talking to. Like if we were talking top down from all levels of government, and you're including like are public school teachers included in that? Or, I wish they were. He said other than the police, he carved out law enforcement.
checks and balances are awesome.
When Democrats are in charge, then it's bad, right? The corollary has to hold true.
I don't think that's necessarily true because I feel like the pendulum swings in both directions.
But it doesn't in the actual running of the day-to-day government.
Yeah, I don't know what is the actual predominance of government
Give it a look.
workers. Yeah,
It's 90%.
I'm curious.
Yeah. But just to say, like...
Yeah, well, we did the well-intentioned self-esteem thing, right?
Yes.
Okay, wait. Percentage of government workers who are Democrats. Ten seconds. Oh boy. Okay, federal employees slightly prefer Democrats in upcoming midterms. Slightly. What is this? Voter preference. A strong minority, 46%, plan to vote for a Democrat for the House race, but federal employees are more torn on which party they will vote for in the Senate race. How's the Senate? Where does he get this thing that they like heavily lean Democrat? Or am I just missing? Or I don't know.
I read a book by Roy Baumeister about the power of willpower. Have you looked at any of his work? So there was a thought that it's not self-esteem. It's willpower. That's the thing. That if you have good willpower, you actually get better outcomes. And that's the one factor. We need to focus on boosting willpower. And there's little things that we can do to impact our willpower throughout the day, throughout our lives, et cetera, et cetera. And that's also fallen out of favor because we've seen that artificially trying to change this trait
You said 90%. Okay.
doesn't really help.
No, okay. So does it not help or does it not work? Like, is willpower enhancement actually not something we can gain traction on? Or is it the fact that people have substantially improved?
He doesn't mean registered Democrats. He just means they lean left. Just like it isn't a stretch to say the media leans left. Oh, so leans left is in what? They don't like support like authoritarian dictators or the complete and total destruction of the government or the mass proliferation of Russian propaganda. Like, what does that mean? Leans left. Like, doesn't worship Trump or give him a slide on every single thing. Okay.
Their willpower in a robust way that lasts, and that doesn't still improve their lives.
I think that
It's probably the former.
we don't know which of the two it is. We just know in a clinical, practical sense, it doesn't.
Yeah. So that comports back to the whole behavioral genetics thing. There's only so much you can change for a person's expressive psychology with external factors, even from childhood, definitely in adulthood. So the idea that you can change someone's general ability to yield willpower, which we express as discipline, is curious. And the behavioral genetics literature would be like, you probably can't make much of a difference. That's the thing is, both intelligence and conscientiousness seem to be deeply genetic. And if we have a robust plan to genetically engineer anyone who wants it, now we got a real solution going. Short of that, we should do our very best in every regard that you expressed on providing social services, so on and so forth. We cannot expect miracle resolutions to many of these societal issues because, and I'll say it very plainly, it's dope to talk about nutritional education. And it helps many people on the margins. But when you try to educate someone who doesn't give a shit about what goes into their bodies, who cares? It doesn't matter. And the reality is that many people like to engender ideas of who they're helping, having met very few or none of the people who they're actually trying to help. If you talk to a lot of people who are very substantially overweight, a humongous fraction of them, sometimes in words, depending on the context, almost always in action, don't really proximately give a fuck to do anything about it. Many of them do. And those are the people who you're going to be able to help a lot. But a lot of them don't. And the thing that revelation that you get from behavioral genetics and sort of multifactorial analysis that reveals like some people just kind of want to do this stuff and they like eating junk and they're not going to be bothered by it because there are hundreds of millions of them that exist in the world and tens of millions in the United States at the extremes even. The optimism you have to have for your ability to change the situation has to be brought down to reality, and your bandwidth for how to think about addressing the problem has to expand to think, okay, we got people nutritionally much more educated. It helped a few percentage points. We thought nutritional education, as we were taught in school, was maybe a third of the issue, but it had a 6% reductive effect, and we're at the saturation point for nutritional education, where people can tell you, and here's been my experience, almost everyone who walks through the door at McDonald's and out comes with a shaken burger, you think that's healthy? Almost everyone will go, no, hell no, what? You give people a bag of chips or a green apple. Which one's healthy? 90% of every American is going to be like, I said this on the podcast, this is a true question, right? Like, no, legitimate.
Speaking of healthy food, I got sidetracked. I ordered food like an hour ago. Fuck! It's going to be cold and I'm going to be grumpy. God damn it. Oh, there's going to be bands flying in chat. Oh, there's going to be bands flying in chat. Cold tendies? Oh my fucking God.
A question. They're like, you're fucking with me. It's the apple. Duh.
Well, if you ask that to Dr. Gundry, he would disagree with you. He says grapes are basically the same thing as Hershey's.
So you know how like once it's like the monk on top of the mountain, the simpleton and the monk agree.
Yeah.
Gundry's that smart that he's come back around.
Wow. Okay. You're giving him a lot of credit.
Dr. Gundry, by the way. I'm so sorry I said Gundry. How insulting. Do you want to do a cigarette break really quick
No.
to
We can't do
enhance
that
our
right
health?
now. No, I want to live a shorter life.
I
so I'm
almost
gonna not
broke my
smoke.
phone in half when I watched the cigarette clip, by the way. But I decided to smoke a cigarette instead because I care about my longevity and something nicotinamide, something other, the British health study, you know the rest.
Oh, man, that was painful. If we control food drive, does conscientiousness not matter for obesity?
Oh man, I would like to agree with that. It won't matter nearly as much as it does now. So if you control completely food drive, so conscientiousness expresses itself in fun ways. You give people ubiquitous access to anorectic medications, let's say 7th gen in 2032. They're just ultra
The better version of Ozempic for
the
those listening.
10x better version. You still got to take the pill. And there are people who, even if it's a one-time genetic enhancer shot, you get the shot, your genes change, you're just going to be skinny with your genes. Some people aren't going to take the shot. Some of those people are just like, hey, did you get to the treatment center to get your shot? They're like, nah. How many people, what is the correlation between conscientiousness and doctor's visits? Mike, it's real high. Some people just...
I feel like that's going to be significantly altered by the amount of effort you have to go. Okay, hold on. I feel like Evil Mike is dramatically over-exaggerating the impacts of conscientiousness now. Like, for instance, he like, if you want to say something like, oh, a low conscientious person is less likely to go to the gym to lose weight, so they're never going to lose weight. Okay, sure. But then if somebody says, well, what if you could just take a pill and lose weight? And he's like, nah, they're low conscientious, they won't do it. Really? What if it was just push a button? Nah, they don't care. Really? Like, I think that the level of effort you have to put in is going to heavily mediate the chances of you actually doing the thing.
just don't give a shit. You ever deal with people in a hospital setting who like haven't been to the doctor in living memory?
Of course.
Yeah. So when your conscientiousness is low, short of us violating your civil
Yeah,
liberties.
look, I have patients that are nihilistic that end up in my office for a variety of reasons,
100%.
and I can't really help them.
Right.
So-
right. So, but the food drive thing is for all the folks with low conscientiousness that take the food drive medication and or get the shot or whatever, they're going to see enormous changes. However, even if you have relatively low food drive, junk food is still fun to eat. And your ability to think of, is this good for me or bad for me? If we get you back down to like normal food drive, you can still be substantially overweight, though not obese, because you just really like to snack. And someone's like, are you hungry? And you're like, not really, just
Well,
eating.
look, bodily autonomy is
Huge deal.
everyone's right. So like I box and that's terrible for me and I know it is, and yet I do it.
Yes, exactly. I have taken grotesque amounts of anabolic steroids and all the bad things I talked about last time on the show. So it will have a huge effect. It won't have
100%.
It won't have 100%.
But who's looking for 100%? I feel like with one variable controlled, you're not going to get 100%.
No, for sure, but you're going to get a lot because food drive is absolutely the quintessential variable. Because if
So if you're going to get a lot, why even talk about conscientiousness? It's not, you can't really change it, as you said,
yet,
if you control for the other variable that you talk about within the poor communities about food drive, it pretty much gets you almost all the way there. Not
Yeah,
all
a
the
lot.
way, a
It'll
lot
do
of
a
the
lot,
way there,
for sure.
a significant majority. Why talk about it?
yeah, easy. So you're going to have a situation in our magical mystery pretend world here where the difference in obesity rates between poor people and richer people used to be, let's say, 10 imaginary units of obesity, and now they are 2 imaginary units of obesity, right? We made an 80% reduction in the difference between wealthier and poor people. We've addressed everything you suggested and everything I suggested, short of conscientiousness. Food drive, medication, access to everything. Everyone's no longer experiencing stress and trauma, relatively same rates, so on and so forth. Like, look at Japan, for example. It's actually just not true to say that poor people in Japan experience more crime, stress, and trauma than richer people, because there's just no statistical differentiation hardly between them. Like, there's just not really any crime and stress and drama anywhere in Japan relative to us, right?
I have no idea.
So yeah, well, you could look at the statistical data, but if you go to Japan, all of a sudden it seems like, okay, where are all the violent people? I'm going to Japan in a little bit, so I'm trying to bring violence to them. I'm kidding, Japanese people, please. All jokes. So if you look at that situation in the future that we could have, where we've reduced the problem an unbelievable amount, but differences still exist, you're going to have the temptation, especially with the ideological bias of most of these institutions that we have that actually make these changes, like institute the regulations for food advertising, so on and so forth, the people behind them, and the people politically who voted in those people, very well-meaning Americans who want the problem to be resolved. Because anything that's a difference between wealthier and poor people, including money itself, is kind of fucking gross, right? Like, what the fuck? Like,
Okay, I don't know if I want to watch the whole rest of this. Do they ever get to a part where they recommend like, oh, well, here's what we should do? Like, here are the, like, if you could snap your finger and do 3 things, Evil Mike, what would you do? Is there like a question like this that comes up, or?
just because you have less money, you should have like shittier health? That's fucked up. Like, we all want the difference to be 0. When the difference used to be 10 units and now is 2, holy shit, to your point, like, that's it. Problem more or
Well,
less
it's
solved.
not problem solved.
No, but like, we did it. Why do I still give a shit about conscientiousness? Here's
Yeah, I kind of disagreed a bit with some of Mike's take here. He was talking about how changing like food advertising laws and shit, it wouldn't really make any difference because fundamentally it has to do with genetics and just people's like temperament or personality traits. Like we've had similar things happen with cigarette smoking, where there was no regulation whatsoever when it came to marketing cigarettes. And you can just look at the difference in rates of cigarette smoking from the early 21st century up into the 1960s where it peaked. And well, if we're talking about specific food products, I wouldn't necessarily.
Oh fuck, I'm sorry. I'm sure that if you get rid of all of the, I'm sure if you get rid of all the advertising for bad food, it would decrease the consumption of that bad food a little bit, but I don't know if it would decrease it a ton.
It kind of depends on what we figure a little bit is.
My guess
Because,
would be
like, I mean,
less than 10% would be my guess.
yeah, so if, like, let's say we had a target for 10%, from a public health perspective, that could be pretty substantive. 10% reduction in fast food intake could be correlated with maybe 2 or 3% reduction in obesity or diabetes or heart disease rates. So you're talking about like thousands of people per year.
Yeah, I agree.
who
I agree. It could be
would-
good for sure.
yeah.
But if you're doing that and you're expecting it to be like an 80% reduction, that's where the problem is. I don't think there'd be anything wrong with changing how some of this stuff is advertised, maybe, sure. Yeah. But
Yeah, I think certain food products could easily be flat out banned, and that would make a substantive reduction. Like that, most people would consider meaningful. So like sugary sweetened beverages. The technology we have for artificial sweetening is pretty friggin' fantastic right now. Like, if you have, Coke Zero, the taste is pretty much indistinguishable. And if there is a detectable taste difference, most people in a blind testing, they actually prefer the taste of the artificially sweetened Coke. That was actually discovered way back, I think, in like the late 90s, where Diet Coke actually scored better on the taste test compared to Classic Coke. So I don't know why at this point we even allow sugary sweetened beverages, like particularly soft drinks. You can maybe at this point make a case for fruit juices, but even now, I think Minute Maid has a very low sugar, like lemonade, where it's only 10 calories per serving, whereas the normal one I think is 120 calories per serving. So at least for soft drinks, I don't know why the hell we even allow, sugary sweetened soft drinks. Just eliminating that product from the market, I think that would make a pretty substantive difference.
okay. Yeah, I don't think I necessarily disagree.
All right.
Okay.
Well, once again, take care, dude.
I love you. Be careful. Bye.
Here's why. Because when you have that smaller difference, people are going to be like, all right, we're not doing enough on the regulation side. We're not doing enough education.
Do you think they'll go
for
too far? What's your
They
concern?
have in almost every other regard. That's just what they do. And, as soon as the oppression Olympics situation that's happened recently in politics, as soon as you could no longer statistically detect different levels of oppression among different genders and races in the United States, which probably was mostly the case about the 1980s, depending on what literature you look, some really in the 1970s, definitely 1990s. In the 90s, you think overtly, insanely racist, homophobic, like in the old Alabama way people. It's just they're teeny, teeny, tiny fraction, and they can't possibly explain all these systemic differences and stuff. People went way overboard for 30 years trying to address these issues, not coming back to being like, okay, what's the base reality here? So for the conscientiousness situation, if we kiboshed every other variable, but we still have this 20%, which absolutely is much lower, but relative to someone who comes of age during that time and sees big differences. You know what I mean? Imagine someone from the year 1600 coming to America and you just give them a tour of New York City and they're like, what's that person like? It's a poor person. He's overweight and he has a cell phone in his hand. Like, right, that's what poor people are like, but it's real bad. They're like, he has no place to sleep. Like, he has a place to sleep. It's warm. He's a gigantic color television. He has access to the internet. He gets essentially like functionally through the city, really, really good health care. Like, what's that mean? Like, nobody really dies of infections anymore unless they like really untreated. All the diseases you know about don't exist anymore. And they're like, I don't understand why we even care about rich and poor. Everyone's rich. But to us growing up today, even small differences can seem quite stark. And so what we'll do in the future then, if we don't account for conscientiousness being a relatively large variable, then we're going to have this thing where we got to do all this other stuff. And the reality is none of that other stuff is going to work because it's completely saturated. We're going to be attacking a problem from completely the wrong angle because we've never sort of taken to task the real crutch, kind of the crux of the issue. A quick offhand example. If you've had some relatives who you deal with, who you've had not so great relations with, you think it's the way I'm speaking to them. It's the way they understand me. We have to have a come to Jesus talk. We have to do the therapy. And it turns out years later, like they have a psychological condition that's endemic and they have to be on drugs and therapy for it, but you never addressed that because you didn't want to be like, hey, Uncle Bill, I think you're fucking crazy, like crazy. I think you need pills because you were like, well, that's not cool. I'm not telling him that. You would have been like, you know what? I'm just not kind enough to Bill. Next time I'm bringing an even bigger Christmas or Hanukkah present or whatever the fuck. And every year you bring a bigger present. He's just the same kind of dick. Now, it was better than when you didn't give him presents at all, but it hit a baseline. And you're like, what am I doing wrong? And the answer is nothing. That's just who Bill is. People with a very low conscientiousness can only be helped to a certain point. They just make different choices. It's like trying to expect your toddler to be formal with greetings and go to school on time by himself. You're like, that's a kid. You can't expect him to do that. People with low trait conscientiousness are going to live their lives in different ways and face a cacophony of problems that don't occur to people of high conscientiousness, problems that even exist for an adult. And if we don't have an understanding that that's a real thing that we should expect, we're going to spend a lot of time and resources that could have alternatively better spent in 50 other different ways on that problem, and they're going to have no effect for generations. We've already done this with education in the United States. We've already done it with a ton of different factors. What I'm saying is, let's get a full understanding compassionately of the problem at hand. Try to understand what fraction of what is accounted for by which variables. Definitely address the variables we can. But then when people say, like, how come there's still room left over? I would like future universities to say, look, you can help people a lot externally, but a lot of it depends on the person himself. And we haven't found a way to change that yet. And if you bright students of today have any great ideas about how to enhance trait conscientiousness of people, we need you to think that through. But so far we've kept away from it, but we know it's a factor. Versus saying, why would you even care about that, you fucking Nazi? And then all of a sudden we're back to square one where we're like, we've deployed all these strategies. We need more strategies. And that,
Because people might think being homeless is easy or something. Homeless people have no chores, okay?
imagine we're to a point where trait conscientiousness isn't accounting for all the obesity differences, and you're like, we need more anorectic intervention through drugs. When you're going to drive people so high in the anorectic scale, regular people who don't have low conscientiousness, who could just say, no, fuck snacks, I don't need any snacks, they're going to be like, the government's going to be like, here's the average dose of, future Ozempic we need you to take. They're going to be getting very low in body weight. They're going to be getting osteopenic, and you're going to say like, well, more, they need more. And you're like, no, we're actually having real nasty side effects from this now. The thing you're trying to change is a thing that can't be changed because you're not even looking at the right variable. It's like, how much more basketball training do I need to give you for you to be able to dunk? You're like, dude, I'm 5'3". There is no amount of training that's getting you to dunk. You're like, no, it's got to be something with the calf tendons. You need to go to Bulgarian basketball camp 24/7. You've just pissed away a child's life changing an unachievable goal.
You are worried about the future, trying to create perfect scenarios that perhaps don't exist. Because of some inevitably
that's the least charitable way to say
unchangeable.
that, yes.
No, because in the future, that's a concern. It's not an issue now. You're saying like right now, think about the social things, but like once you get the benefit of that, then don't think that you need to do more.
I don't know any people that I've ever talked to who are genuinely concerned to try to make social changes that think they're working on a 10 to 20% factor. Almost all of them think they're working on an 80% factor, and they're not. So I think today...
Does that matter? Again, in the present.
Yeah.
In the present.
Yeah,
Why?
yeah. Because how the government has finite resources. And if you think you have a huge degree of traction on a really big problem, then you're going to pour a lot of resources in that problem. And it's going to take resources away from other problems. Whereas if you realize like, okay, we can pour some resources into this, and to be honest, we're doing pretty much as we can now, and the rest is kind of not up to us, then you go, okay, we're doing decent here. Let's switch to an alternate way of affecting other variables. We don't have free money coming out of the ground. If we start getting free money coming out of the ground, fuck it, spend money on everything. We just have people eat money at that point. You know what I mean?
Why do you think that when the self-esteem movement came about and people labeled that as the trait to focus on, no one called them Nazis?
Well, it's the opposite of a Nazi ideology. A lot of conservative thinkers called them socialists and communists.
When they said the self-esteem.
No, yeah. You're gonna make up a bunch of entitled assholes and pussies. You're gonna pussify a whole generation. There was all sorts of nasty things said about that. But fundamentally, when you say, look, who's against people having more self-esteem? Kind of nobody. I mean, somehow if you could really improve people's self-esteem, people generally think that's a good thing. But if you say, like, look, like some people, the number one cause of the problems in their life is them and how they behave from a largely deeply cultural and genetic perspective. Like there are entire subsets of American society with nothing racial, by the way. Every race has subsets of their culture that is like YOLO culture, like live for today, fuck everything else. Like Don't you think that matters? You're like, whoa, no, we're not gonna go judging people's cultures. It seems nasty to judge people's activities. It seems nasty to blame the victim. And that's why you don't get as much pushback about it. And that's why I'm here embarrassing myself to push back on it for reasons of, again, trade-offs of what issues you attack. Because if you think something's really tractable and you have the money to spend and it's worthwhile, you fucking spend the money. If you think something's, not so tractable, we've already spent a lot of money, it's not seeming to have marginal effects at this point, you got to ask, because like, from a grander perspective, the kind of issues that affect the rest of the world make us look like spoiled fucking children. There are parts of Asia and Africa that are destitute. Mm-hmm. They need our help. And being a humanist,
like, I don't know. I don't know if I'm like, America hasn't had this obesity rate for 200 years, right? America hasn't been, what, 60%? Oh, no, it's not 60%. What is it? Probably 40% obesity. Like, this obesity rate has increased over time. It's not because of the changes in our genes, right? It's because of the changes of the food availability, which is 100% environmental. This is why you have to be really careful when you talk about like heritability of genetic traits and everything. So like earlier, it might sound facetious when I say, wow, you could have the genetic predisposition of being the best athlete in the world, but if you starve a child, he's not going to grow up to be as tall as he could be, right? That might seem facetious, but it's equally facetious or stupid to be like, well, 40% of Americans, generally, it's just they're obese because of genetic factors, and there's not much you can do to change that. Wait, hold on. What was the obesity in this country 150 years ago? Can I find? Is there like an obesity over time? Before it's always been the exact same. Find me something earlier than 2000. Jesus. Oh, actually, I wonder how long we've even measured it. In the 1960s, AI summary, sorry. This is from the CDC. So how is this increasing over time, right? So this is like heritability. I'm not even doing this justice because I don't have the fucking educational background to talk about this fucking topic. Heritability only measures the difference between two people, a single trait, the difference in that trait, and how much that difference can be explained by genetics is what heritability measures. It doesn't measure technically the total potential or the bottom potential of a thing. You can't use it to measure groups versus groups. You can't measure it, and that groups could be geographically and genetically, or it could be through time, right? Because we wouldn't say that, have we really, have we changed genetically that much in 60 years that we've tripled our obesity rates? We changed that much genetically? No. The change here between these different groups of people, maybe on the aggregate, maybe there has been some genetic change, broadly speaking, but almost all of this is going to be environmental, right? Because of the availability of super crazy foods, right? So if you could take the exact same genetic stock, the same conscientiousness and the same whatever bullshit, and you would have put them in a 1960s food environment, you would expect to see their obesity probably change to the 1960s obesity, right? I'm not taking away anything he's saying about genetic influence on traits, but I think he's dramatically downplaying how environment can influence how your genes express themselves in society.